Oh, you got her, dude. She's down.
Let's go.
Dude, I just shot a deer of a lifetime.
Freaking smoked him.
One with nature, and if you're a believer, one with God.
Definitely gets your heart pumping. Boy, you are in trouble.
Fall Obsession Podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another Fall Obsession Podcast episode. I'm Sam, I'm your host for this week's podcast. We are driven by Ridge Rock Hunt Company, and I will talk more about them at the close of our episode today. Kim Sullivan is my guest this week. She's one of our field staff here at Fall Obsession. Welcome back to the podcast, Kim.
Thank you. Excited to be on here.
Yeah, excited also. Always good to jump back on here with our staffers, and I don't know, I kind of have the post deer hunting blues right now. It's kind of sad that it's all coming to an end, especially after such a good year. So it's kind of, I'm glad we get to recap it, but it's kind of disappointing at the same time.
Yeah, you're not the only one. It's been rough.
Yeah. Well, on that note, I know a couple months back we had a photo on our social media pages and everything of a nice buck that you were able to take this year, and kind of wanted to lead in and tell that story here today. But starting it off, I know you've been on the podcast with us several times before. We've talked some management strategies. You've kind of over the course of time given us some history on some certain deer that you've hunted over the years and everything. So what did the season look like entering this year, and what were some of your expectations as your hunting season started in 2022?
So this year for me, I have had a complete change, a big 360 when it comes to my hunting. I actually had to make some life changes, and just considering, a better path for my future. And within those changes, I had to move where I previously lived and previously hunted. So I am still in the same county, which is Franklin County in Virginia. I'm just on the western end of the county in a place called Ferrum, which is kind of where I work. I've been working there for 3 years. I was just on the opposite side of the county as far as where I lived and hunted. But now I'm in the same area. I'm about 3 miles from where I work. But with that being said, I no longer have the same property I used to hunt. So I don't have any history anymore with my deer that I used to have history with. This year, where I moved, the date, I think I moved in June in the summer. And right when I moved, I began my land research. I had no idea where I was going to be hunting. I didn't have anywhere to hunt. I didn't know where I was going to hunt. So I just constantly, did some land research on my Onyx and HuntWise apps that I use. And I ended up finding a familiar name on the landowner with a family that I used to teach. Their granddaughter, and I reached out to them, and it was about 3 miles from where I currently live now, where the property is. And they were so sweet and offered me, they said, absolutely, we don't hunt that property. It's about 40 acres. They're like, we don't hunt that side. We have another piece of property that we really stay on. Nobody ever really hunts over there. You're more than welcome to. You're more than welcome to come out and do whatever you want. If you want to do your food plotting stuff, whatever, So I think I lucked out with that because, like I said, it's 3 miles from where I live now. And I remember the day that they gave me access or, granted me permission, I was out there and I packed up my stuff. I put on my scouting clothes. I got out there, set up some cameras. I just walked the property, just trying to figure it out. So I basically started from day one, not knowing anything about the property, just to getting out there, scouting. I think for the first few weeks, I was checking my cameras weekly and didn't have much on there except for bear. I had a ton of bear.
Huh.
And then like a few weeks later, this big buck showed up on camera and I was like, oh gosh. I said, he's mine this year. He's a shooter. I'm focusing on him. And it completely turned my excitement because I was just it was the unknown for me. You know, I had been so lucky the past few years to where, you know, I would walk out the back door and I could go to a tree stand, and we had, you know, a prime hunting spot that I no longer have access to. So it was just the super unknown, and I was just faced with a lot of challenges of figuring it out on my own again. And but again, you know, the challenge is what makes it all worth it if you can piece it together. I just constantly put my trail cameras out. I was walking over the summer trying to figure the property out. It was a tough property to figure out because the field entering the property was right off the road and was behind the landowners' homes. And then you hit a power line, a big power line, where it had been cut over a few years back. So it had grown up pretty tall. It was thick with briars and like small, thin pines. So I felt like the deer would be bedded in there, but it was just hard to figure out where to hunt because there were really no trees to be able to climb and set up ladder stands and stuff. So I really needed to buy a tripod stand, but I just did not want to invest in that right away.
Right.
So I went out and I bought a ground blind because most of my pictures where I were getting the buck was on like an open portion of that power line, about 20 yards. And he was in there really frequently. He also showed up with another really nice buck. The one that I ended up killing was a big wide 8-pointer, and that's the one I keep talking about that kept showing up on camera. But he would show up with another buck, which I think was a 10-pointer. He was real tall, but a narrow buck. Either way, I said, if I see one of those deer, I'm probably going to shoot it. And so I bought a ground blind. I remember setting up the ground blind. I think it was like 3 days before opening day of bow season, which I can't remember the date, but you know, early October for us.
Yeah.
And I did not want to set it up super early because there were so many bear on my camera, and I was like, I know how that's going to go. So I ended up setting it up like 3 days before the season opener, and I remember we had some type of like horrible weather. Maybe it was like we had some remnants of a hurricane. I can't remember, but we had crazy wind leading up to opening day and rain. And I did not hunt opening morning because it was pouring down, raining, windy. And I went in there opening evening. And when I got in there, my ground blind was just tore up. And it wasn't from a bear. It was just all twisted up from the wind and stuff. And I was like, well, there goes my plan for the day. So I ended up hunting off the ground that day. I didn't see anything. I said, okay, well, I'm done with the ground blind stuff. So I ended up taking my climber in. Our acorn crop was crazy this year. We had a big crop of acorns, and I mean, it was to the point where you would walk in and they were just everywhere. So it was just a matter of finding where those deer wanted to be, where they were, you know. I don't think they had to move a lot this season to feed. So I ended up hunting. I had to hunt real close to the property line because there were not many hardwoods and oaks, but I found a good spot. I got in. The first few days that I hunted, I saw 3 or 4 does each day. And then I kept hunting. I didn't really see much. And then there were days where I saw nothing, and I just kept hunting. I kept at it, but didn't see anything. So then I, you know, started to get a little frustrated. I'm like, okay, maybe I'm not figuring out this property the way that I thought. So I would move and I relocate to a different spot. And I ended up finding this spot where there was 3 or 4 fresh scrapes when I got in there. And I was like, okay, I think this is a good spot. I'm going to set my climber up. This was another thing. I didn't have any hang-on stands. I didn't have any ladder stands. I used my climber every single day, which if you hunt with a climber, I love them, but they're exhausting to, you know, go in and out with, and just like some days I just get so unmotivated because I'm just like, oh, I don't feel like the climber today. I don't feel like using it, but it's all I had. So I just kept at it as much as I could. Some days I would leave my climber on the tree and just come back and whatnot. The area where I thought was going to be good because there was fresh sign, I had to walk through the middle of the property, and I just felt like, you know, I was messing up by walking in, but in reality, it was really the only good way in, because the other way in was just so thick. I just couldn't, I didn't want to walk through that. But, I hunted probably a week straight and I didn't see anything. And then one evening I saw a big buck coming off of, there's a pasture on the back of this property on another piece of property. And I saw a buck coming off of that pasture field. I couldn't tell what he was, but I got excited. So I knew that he was a decent buck. And I said, okay, so maybe I am in the right location. I stayed, I hunted the next few days, saw nothing. So then my frustration level goes back up and I'm just like, it's hard when you're constantly there and you're working so hard to get in and you're taking so much time and then you just don't see much. So I gave it a few days, maybe a week break where I did not go back in there. And I went back. It was towards the end of October, where usually the rut is starting for us then. You're starting to see some chasing and whatnot. And I remember, telling myself, I'm outsmarting myself. I need to go back where I saw the doe, where I saw all the does at the beginning of the season, where there were acorns. That's where I need to be at this point. And I just need to hunt it and just see what happens.
Yeah.
And so I went back in there, and I remember it was the Wednesday before bow season went out, which for us is like the last week of October. And I went in there and I set up, and it was a fairly warm evening, and I felt, how you go in sometimes and you're like, I just feel this evening feels good.
Yeah.
I had set up in there, and I got that feeling. And then on the back side of the property, there's some houses, and there were kids outside playing, and they were so loud, and they were just screaming, having fun, enjoying a warm October evening. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to see anything today. That's just my luck. But I stayed at it, and it was like 30 minutes later, I looked up and there was 3 or 4 does out in front of me, and I had no idea where they came from. Sometimes deer just appear out of nowhere. And then I swore I heard a grunt. And sure enough, over my right shoulder, this buck he was nose down and he was going straight for those doe. It was too far with a bow, but I tried to grunt and try to get him to come back in, but he wasn't having it. And I just remember, because I hadn't had a lot of pictures of him. That's the first time I'd actually seen him, and not from a trail camera picture. And I was shaking. I was excited. It completely turned my whole frustration around, even though, I didn't kill him, but I did see him. And I said, okay. So I remember I took off work the next morning. I took off a half day, and I did a personal day. So I didn't do a sick day. I did a personal day.
Yeah, let's clarify.
Yeah, and I hunted there that morning, and I did not see him, but there was a ton of deer activity that morning. I saw a really nice 8-pointer, a different 8-pointer, a lot of chasing going on, and I said, okay, this is the right spot. It's just a matter of time now. I went back Thursday evening. I didn't see anything. And then I said, okay, I'm going to leave it alone for a day. Muzzleloader opens Saturday. So I did not hunt at all Friday. And Saturday we had horrible weather again. It's just the trend for our season this year. It was raining, pouring, downpouring. I said, well, I'm not going with my muzzleloader, Saturday morning in the rain. So, but I told myself, I said, the second that it stops raining, I said, I'm going to be out there. And the rain cleared about 2 p.m. that evening, and I got in there. I think I was set by about 2:30, and I had left my stand, so my stand was soaked. But whatever. That's little problems at this point. Right. So got in there about 2:30. It was about 3 o'clock, and a decent sized 6-pointer came in. He was feeding around, and then it was, I think, about 3:45, a spike ran in 3 does, and he was just grunting his head off, chasing these does around. And, I'm just sitting there watching them. The does are right underneath my stand at this point. And then they all get their heads up, and they're just staring at something behind me. And I slowly look over my right shoulder, and here he is coming up this old roadbed, coming straight towards us. And I was like, oh, and I did not hesitate. I knew exactly who he was. And I said, okay, I had my gun in my lap at that point, and I had to turned my gun over my right shoulder. And I thought I messed up because the butt of my gun, the rubber got stuck in my rain jacket as I was trying to turn. And I was like messing with it. And I know I made some kind of noise when I finally got it turned. And he stopped and he froze right where he was. And I was like, oh God, I just screwed up. But nope, he stopped perfectly. And I just put my scope on him and I shot. And I remember this like it was yesterday. He literally just like trotted off down the woods behind where he came from and just stopped. And I was like, oh my, I missed him. Like, what? And so I'm shaking, you know, trying to reload my gun, trying to find my quick load, trying to get everything. I'm like, oh my God, I missed him. What? And then I see him start wobbling and then he just falls. And I was like, oh my gosh. And then, you know, I remember from the stand, like calling my mom and dad, FaceTiming them and calling my important people. And then the landowner actually texted me and was like, was that you? And I said, yeah. He said, was it the big one? I said, I think so. So I took my time getting down and went over to him. And I mean, best feeling ever when you see him there and you walk up to him and put your hands on him. Then the work begun because I had to drag that thing out myself. The landowner actually brought a 4-wheeler and came to help me, but where I went in, he couldn't get into because it was just so thick and the creek, couldn't cross the creek. So I had to do some crazy work myself. But you know, it's at that point I don't care how hard it is. It's the best feeling. So long story short, completely new territory this year. Huge challenge trying to figure it out, but so worth it in the end when you actually piece it all together and it just works out the way you wanted it to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's crazy how fast, how just one moment like that can completely change the whole dynamic of your entire season. You know, I've experienced that several times. So, and I laughed when you said that that you could hear the neighbors' kids, you know, yelling and screaming, because actually where I have one of my bow stands on our property here in Texas, it's somewhat close to the property line, but now, at least my last sit of the season, with all the leaves gone and everything, like I hadn't hunted that barren on that property in that spot ever before, and it's reasonably close to the property line. There's a house on the other side of the property line. I bow hunt the area, so it's not an issue, but I could hear the husband pull back in when he got home from work and shut his door and get out and have a conversation in the driveway with his wife. And I'm like, golly, their voices really carry without all these leaves on the trees. Holy cow.
Yeah. Hope they don't talk about anything too important.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's funny though. It's just, but like you said, like that one moment I was so frustrated just all season long. You know, texting my friends being like, oh, I hate this is horrible, I haven't seen anything, and then it just all changes. You know, it's just it's I think it's hard to have such a positive mindset when you put so much work into it and then it's just not coming together like you thought it would. But then, you know, you just have to stay at it, have to stay persistent, and it just usually pays off.
Yeah, no, it will at some point for sure. So is this a property that you're going to stay on or keep hunting, moving, or at least plan to right now, moving into next season?
Yeah. I actually remember how I was talking about how the 2 bucks were traveling together this summer. I never saw the other one, which I said was like a narrow, tall 10-pointer. Never saw him, but I got him, and I never really saw pictures of him after September, but I got him back on camera after I took the buck that I took. I got him back on camera. I think it was like the 1st and 2nd week of December. And I thought to myself, I said, oh, do I want to hunt him? I don't know. Because we have three, I just said 4. We have 3 buck tags here in Virginia. And I thought about hunting him, but I was like, you know what? I said, I'm happy with where I'm at, with what I got this year. I said, I'm just going to leave him alone. He will be a stud if he makes it into next year. And I haven't checked my cameras yet. I plan to check them at some point either this weekend or early next week to see what bucks made it through. But he will definitely be a target, and hopefully, I saw a couple other ones on camera, and even the 8-pointer I saw the morning I took off work, he will be a good buck next year too. So I'm hopeful that there'll be some more moving in, and I'll be able to access that property, which I'm pretty sure they're going to let me, stay at it. So that's exciting.
Yeah. Any big or major changes, upgrades, stuff that you would look to do drastically different next year?
I'm definitely going to invest in either a ladder stand, a hang-on stand, or a tripod stand. That way I don't have to consistently carry in my climber every single day.
Yeah.
With that being said, though, I love hunting out of a climber. I think every single buck I've killed up to this point has been out of my climber. But I think I'm going to invest in a second climber. That way I can kind of leave it. And then if I don't, go back to hunt, I have another one where I can kind of rotate through and hunt different spots. And I think that'll keep me from feeling so much pressure to go in and out with my climber every single day. So investing in more stands. And I think now that I feel like I kind of have a grip on where the deer are moving and traveling and bedding, I might try to make a food plot in one area of the field of the back corner, which is just off of the power line where I think they're bedding. So I think that'll make a big difference. I don't know what our acorn crop is going to be like next year, but I think if I have a different food source for them, then I think I'm going to see more bucks traveling through. So trying to get more food in the area, more stand placement, and stand choices. That way I can not be as frustrated with one stand over and over and over.
Yeah.
So those are my two goals for that area next year.
Gotcha. Yeah, those climbers can be exhausting. I remember It was a couple years ago. Our production director Nick Powell, he drew a wildlife management area public land tag down here in Texas, basically allowing him access to this certain 5,000 acre piece of state-owned land, but you still have to have permission to hunt it, I guess, however that works. But I went out there to film for him, and what we had to work with out there was climbers. And that was the first time we both had ever used them like religiously for several days. And oh my word, it was exhausting. I remember the last morning, we found a really tall tree, like about as tall as you get in Texas. Like you could probably go 20, 25, 28 feet up. And so I'm the cameraman, so I'm like, all right, well, I got to get above him. So I went as high as I possibly could, and he's fumbling around with his stay on the ground. And when he looked up at me and saw how high I was, he just had this look of defeat on his face, because he's like, you just went that high. That means that I have to get right up there next to you. He was very disappointed.
Yeah. And it's not easy. I mean, it's physically demanding when you do it over and over and over. I mean, at the beginning of the season when I start using it, I'm sore the next day.
Yeah.
And it's probably pitiful for me to say, but I am, and I feel it. And it's just like, especially when it's hot, when it's the beginning season and it's, it's hot October days, and you're just like, by the time you get up there, you're sweating, and it's just like, is this really worth it right now?
Yeah.
And I just get so mad when I start getting hot and sweating. I'm like, this is not how it's supposed to be.
Yeah, exactly.
But don't get me wrong, I hate hunting when it's freezing too. I hate it. I like hunting when it's warm.
I'll take somewhere in between. I don't do well with the unseasonably warm hunts myself, but I also don't want to be in a tree freezing my toes off.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Yep.
Well, one other thing that I wanted to kind of bring up, and it's kind of random but kind of related, was kind of talking about the whole shoot or pass factor, because whether it's this new property that you're starting these new adventures on, or even going back to your previous experiences on previous pieces, you've always been very, very diligent and very mindful of trying to give deer a chance to get mature, and doing your best to have good quality deer on your place. So what are and sidebar to that too is that I know you and I have compared some notes, here and there too, whenever a borderline deer might show up on camera or whatever the case might be. But what are some things that you look for? What are some of your thought processes behind making that shooter pass determination on a buck?
Number one for me is my trail camera usage. And I've had this conversation with a couple of people who aren't big into using cameras. I tell them all the time, I'm like, honestly, like, I don't know how I would make a decision in the moment if I didn't know a buck. I think the ability to get to know what deer are on your property with trail cameras are huge because, you might have a buck that you think is borderline, but then you know that there's a bigger buck on your property. Are you going to wait for that one? But if you don't know, if you don't have cameras out there and you don't know, it's, for me, it would be very hard to judge. So I love using my cameras because I think that helps me rule out certain deer that might be borderline for me. Or, if I have a target buck in mind based on my cameras, like, I'm going to solely focus on that buck and try to stay away from the other ones. So camera usage is huge for me. I also, honestly, I don't plan on shooting a deer unless I'm going to mount it. And, a lot of my friends are like, but that's, you get a shoulder mount every time you shoot a deer. I'm like, yeah, I just, that's my preference. And
Yeah, that's the standard.
yeah, and it's super expensive, but at the same time, like, I just think that it gives value to the bucks that you're killing. And I mean, European mounts, they're beautiful too, but I just prefer the shoulder mounts. And I'm not going to take a buck if I'm not going to mount it. And so I think that helps me judge in the moment as well. I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not going to mount that one. I'm not going to shoot it. And then they have the ability to be something in the next year or two. It's crazy what deer can be if you give them 1 year or 2 years, Also, I think it goes in, obviously, the maturity of the deer, which, again, cameras help me study that. Is it a young buck? Does it have potential to be something else in a couple of years? Do I have the ability to let it pass? Do I have pressure on my land? If I let this deer go, somebody else going to kill it? Or can I let it go and it be fine because I don't have a lot of pressure on the land that I'm hunting? This year, I don't think that I really had a lot of pressure where I was hunting. So, like I said, the buck that that I showed up late season, which is, I mean, I think it's a shooter buck, but I said, no, I'm just going to leave it alone and it should be a stud next year.
Yeah.
I have that ability where some people might not. But at the same time, like, I think it's, with that being said, like, there's no point. I don't feel like I'm greedy when it comes to hunting, where some people are. And if they see a buck, they're going to shoot it because it's on their property and they know that somebody else is going to kill it if they don't. I think greed does come into a play when it comes into hunting for some people. But I try not to see it that way, because if I don't give it a pass, then that buck might not make it, So maturity level of the deer, I always try to judge that. Cameras are huge for me. The pressure on my land and my ability to judge whether I'm going to mount it or not. I think that those all go into play as far as when I'm making a decision out there, I think for different people, the perception is different. And even me a couple years ago, I would have taken different deer than I take now based on what I've killed in the past. And I think as you mature as a hunter or as you grow as a hunter, your perception and what you want to kill changes. And I think still we have to remember that if it excites you to the point where you're going to be happy about it, then value that. And if it excites you, you don't need to explain to anybody else, And I think hunters, as we all have standards, I think this year I actually saw a lot of posts on social media where it wasn't my biggest, but like, you're downplaying your deer, you're downplaying your kill at that point. If it excites you, and you're happy about it, take it.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes we just forget that we're doing this because we love this. It's a passion. Most people hunt because it's a passion of theirs, and it's a true hobby, and we love doing it. And sometimes we forget that we get excited. Like, go for it. If it excites you, go for it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's standard this, standard that, but don't forget about the excitement in it.
I love the way you articulated it, and because most people might hear that statement of, well, if I'm not going to mount it, I'm not going to shoot it. If you take that alone out of what you just said, people look at it like, oh, she's a trophy hunter. That's all there is to it. And you elaborate on it so much better than that, because it is so much more than that. It is, yes, it's a standard, but it's not. You're not just being greedy for big deer. That's one of your personal criteria, but then there's also a level of respect for the animal that comes with that, and then there's another level of sense of accomplishment, especially when somebody like you that actually works, puts time and effort into a property and into the deer on that property, being able to remember that accomplishment of growing these deer to that point, through that animal on the wall. It's more than a trophy hunt. It's a standard. It's an accomplishment. It's blood, sweat, and tears, at that point. So
you're dang right on that one.
Yeah.
And it's like, if I need meat, I'm going to take a doe. I don't want to just shoot a buck just for the sake of, shooting a buck.
Right.
Because to a sense, I guess I would be a trophy hunter. But that's what really, really excites me. And, I know there are other people out there that are like, no, we're doing this strictly because we need deer meat. And that's perfectly fine. Whatever your perception is on your hunting and whatever you get from it and whatever excites you, I think, you don't let others downplay that. Like, value what you really, truly love about hunting. And I truly love watching these deer grow and taking them at a point where I'm going to put them on the wall.
Yeah, there's a huge that just you don't get that understanding or that the impact of that accomplishment unless you do it, unless you are involved more deeply into managing a property and stuff. And I love what you said too about your perception or your standard might change over time too, because like last year on our property in Texas, I was trying, in the name of, everybody knows this if you've been following us for over a year or watching Texas Dirt, but in the name of deer management, I was passing bucks last year that in years prior, on properties prior, I would have shot them the second they walked out. But I let them walk. One of them, I probably should have shot one of them. In hindsight, for sure, should have shot one of them. But then we get into this year, and with our drought and all the other things, and we've talked about it on the podcast before, but all the other things that we were impacted by, we didn't have the caliber of bucks that we had last year. And so I'm going into this season like I'd kill to see any one of those deer that I saw last year, but at the same time, we had to, you still have to be management minded to a point, and then again, using your trail cams, using your intel, we were able to determine down here that, hey, this is a cull buck year down here, pretty much. We need to get some of these culls out of here, and these mature bucks that still have the potential to be something better with better vegetation, everything next year, we need to make sure that we let them walk and focus on some culls this year. So, yeah, it's an ebb and flow. It's a give and take, and it's a study is what it is.
Yeah. It is. And I mean, if you come in my house and look at my deer from my first buck, to the second year I started hunting, to the third year, I mean, it just progresses. And it's something I'm super proud of. And, I feel like I've grown as a hunter to the point where I'm not trigger happy. I can watch them. I can pass on them. I like that. Other people don't care about that, and that's perfectly fine. But that's just something that I've always progressed with, and I value it, and I appreciate it. Honestly, I like investing a lot of time in these deer and watching them grow.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So much more of a reward in the end when you do that. And it's,
Oh yeah.
yeah, can't explain it. So.
Yep. Yep. And I think, this year, like, it's, I feel like I really, really was proud of myself this year because 100% me, and in the past, like, I've had help. No, I haven't hunted out of my boyfriend's stand and he let me pull the trigger, not that, but, this year it was all me, and that excites me. I think in a sense because a lot of the times, like, I've had people ask me before, or I get other people telling me, who's letting her hunt, because she killed a big deer, and I'm like, no one. Like, I'm doing this myself, and I don't. And I know, the stereotype of, a girl hunting with her boyfriend and she kills a big buck on his property. I don't want to be that stereotype. Like, I want to work for it. I want to learn how to do it. And I learn by doing, and I think that's always been my challenge. And I love that I've kind of figuring out as I go, and so this year I'm just super, super proud of myself for doing that.
That's awesome. Rightfully so, for sure. I hate the perception that, like you alluded to, that social media gives off on no matter who it is, whether they're saying that she was just, handed that deer basically, or even for, I know some of these other big name guys, in the industry, that they shoot a big deer and everybody starts jumping on them because they're like, oh man, they make all the money in the world. They can, nobody can pay for deer. Nobody like us can pay for deer, of that quality, but they're quick to judge, and what they don't realize that he might be a big name guy with a show, but he owns 500 acres of his own land and he manages it, and he's been working on building that caliber of buck for 4 years already. They completely ignore that fact. So I hate that that's out there, but good for you for breaking the mold. So
I mean, people can judge, but we know what we do.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
we know the work that goes into it, and gotta be happy with it. Yep.
Well, Kim, I've really enjoyed our conversation this evening. It's been fun to catch up, to recap your challenging yet still rewarding season. You were handed an intimidating blank slate, it seemed like, but made the most of it. So appreciate you sharing that.
Thank you for having me on here to tell the story. I appreciate it.
You bet. Well, for our listeners, we're going to wrap it up here. Thanks for listening to another Fall Obsession podcast episode. If you haven't already, hit that follow and subscribe button, whatever platform you're listening on. We're on all major podcast platforms, as well as our YouTube channel and Carbon TV. So be sure you check us out wherever you prefer to listen, and turn those notifications on. We drop a new episode every single Monday morning, so you can start your week and you're driving to work with Fall Obsession podcast and be dreaming about deer season, even though it's already over, just like I am over here right now. So social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, go wild. Go follow Fall Obsession. We post daily. Fallobsession.com is our website. That's the hub. Go there to find all of our content, all of our media series, gear reviews, wild game recipes, podcasts, you name it, we got it. Go check it out. Pick you up some apparel. And last but not least, Ridge Rock Hunt Company. They are the podcast partner, Derek and Lacey over there in Mississippi. They do an outstanding job setting folks up with vetted and trusted outfitters across the country. So whatever you're looking to hunt, if you're looking to check off that bucket list hunt or that dream hunt you've been saving up for, give Derek a call. He'll work with you on timeline, licensing, state, outfitter, all that kind of stuff. All of his outfitters are vetted and trusted, so give Ridge Rock a call. Check them out on social media and on their website, Ridge Rock Hunt Company. Kim, thank you again. Enjoyed it.
Thank you.
All right, guys, we're back again next week for another Fall Obsession podcast. I'll catch you then.